be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo FM.
And hello, K-Man. I'm your host, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Salmon, and welcome to Straight Talk on Bobo FM.
The phone lines are open, 745-2626. You can join the conversation either by adding your own topic or by joining the one selected by both Ellio and myself. And you can add your, as we say, 2 cents to our remarks, and let's see where we take it. We're also simulcasting live on YouTube, Instagram, and hopefully very, very soon, Facebook as well as over your radio dial. Ellio, happy Thursday. How was your day today?
Today was a very relaxing day, Austin, to be honest with you. Yeah.
Well, you got to have those every now and again.
You need one. You need one. You know, the Bible tells you to give that at least 1 day a week. Get some rest, right?
That's right.
It's very important. So I got mine today. I guess Thursday becomes my Sabbath this week.
It certainly does.
Because I'll be working my butt off on Saturday and Sunday.
But remember, you still got one more day of the week. You got Friday tomorrow to look forward to.
Well, I got Friday, but I'm resting today, so I'm just letting you know. What most people consider to be the Sabbath, Saturday or Sunday, I will not be resting. Today, Thursday, is my Sabbath.
Well, as long as you're well and rested for Monday evening when we go live again.
Oh, yeah.
That's all that matters.
That'll be our 4th week.
That will be our 4th
AKA kind of like a month kind of thing.
Yeah, we're almost at our full month. I think March 10th will be the same as 1 month.
Correct, yeah. Something like, hey, that's my daughter's birthday.
That's right. Well, today we have no guests. We've had the pleasure of hosting 2 high-caliber guests over the last 2 days. Tuesday with the Honorable Kenneth Bryan, and then
3, right?
Wednesday with the...
You're missing 80. You're missing 80.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, of course. 3. Right? Yes, indeed. Three. Thank you very much.
3 is the lucky number.
Was last week, and then we had Eddie Thompson Tuesday, and then Gilbert McLean on Wednesday. Some fabulous dialogue and discussion, and certainly judging from listener feedback, certainly an educational one.
Went all right.
It went all right. And
of course, they've got 2 special guests right back here again on Thursday.
They do, with limited interruptions as usual.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, let's start off with the usual compulsory good news for the first half hour of the program.
You better don't make it compulsory. Give yourself a little flexibility.
I know, you're so right, because sometimes it's really, really hard to find. But I think this is right up your alley. You were touching on it earlier this week, perhaps in a different forum. But the first national ID cards are scheduled to be rolled out this week. The government says it plans to begin rolling out the National Identity Program this week after Cabinet approved the necessary regulations to implement the ID card initiative. The first to receive the new national ID cards will be government members involved in the project. This will allow the system to be tested and fine-tuned before proceeding further. Following that phase, the next group of people to get their ID cards will be civil servants, and there are several thousand of them, followed then by the general public. The good news is the cards will be available free of charge and on a voluntary basis, so you don't have to mandatory have a national ID in your pocket. That we can perhaps choose to debate or not, but they will provide both the physical and digital proof of a person's identity and include the cardholder's photograph, name, date of birth, sex, immigration status, and otherwise unique card ID number, with additional optional information available on a scannable QR code. So this is right up your alley in terms of technology, but again, something that I know, if we are fair, you began the early works on, suggesting how long it can take to get to, that end of the tunnel, so to speak.
Yeah, well, again, I will stress that, and I know there were some persons like usual, I saw the same thing on the pension, but now that I'm in front of the mic, I'll say, yeah, I was involved in terms of working as the first person in charge of e-government. It was more in terms of creation of the ECID, which technically is required if you want to have something like a national ID.
Well, maybe you tell folks what an ECID is, but also when you say the first person, what year would that have been?
That was 2009. That's the first time the government went ahead, implemented, put together an actual position, someone in charge of e-government, trying to, again, evolve government in a sort of electronic way. I was blessed to be the first person in charge of that. We created what was called at the time ESID. I think they made a name change, kind of like Pride Cleanup went to Nice Cleanup.
Right.
ESID went to something else, which I won't even try to remember what that is, but it was for e-services ID. And again, that put the infrastructure in place. As I mentioned yesterday, it was really about trying to make sure that government could become one seamless body. It was like not 52 government departments, but Austin Harris was the same everywhere. Yeah. And that obviously gave you a unique identifier. And in fact, you got the unique identifier from the time you got your driver's license renewed or whatever.
Right.
Most person may not have known that. But yeah, so you actually issued already an ESID. Again, natural at the time, we decided that we weren't going to go forward with a particular national ID. And quite rightly, because persons get a lot of concerns. You know, Big Brother is watching us and what are they doing? And I think that is something that we need to discuss on the program as well. Yeah. Because there is some legitimacy to that, because even though it may be well-intended, you could have persons or, you know, whatever, a person or persons who might try to abuse that for their own purposes. So like persons might be concerned about, is that going to carry us to the point of taxation tomorrow? Right. And, you know, that's a big one for me, right?
Yeah, indeed. Well, we were certainly talking about this yesterday, and, you know, on two different fronts. On the one hand, we tend to be afraid of data collection because we assume something sinister. Yeah. And to your point, what, you know, may have taken 16 years, 2009 to today, is 16 years to roll it out versus when it was first rolled out in terms of the initial infrastructure. I think, to your point, highlights that security protocols. As we said earlier this week, government, unlike private sector, can't go and buy software to apply to their needs, particularly when it involves personal data of its citizens. Yeah. So in this case, again, proprietary software had to be written from the ground up, and arguably some might say that's what took up the lion's share of the time.
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, you had a lot of the infrastructure was already there in terms of programming, etc. And let's use, for example, the license plates. Really, at the end of the day, when I was there, we weren't going to get new license plates. You know, maybe somebody needs to check that out and investigate it. Why do you have to get license plates? Really, all you needed was a little RF strip.
Right.
So our plan was simply where you had that little white slip on your car that said, and you know there's some new drivers saying, what's he talking about? Anyway, back in the day.
History lesson, kiddies.
History lesson. Listen up.
Front of the class.
They used to be on the left-hand side, or was it the right-hand side? Right-hand side of your car, I think. I'm not really sure. No, I think it's a left. Yeah, it had to be a left because the officers would have stood on the side of the road. Yeah. So on the left-hand side of your car, on the windshield, would have had a white piece of paper, normally about 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Yeah. And again, that would have a specific date, you know, that would have said, for example, December 2025. So that anyone checking the traffic in the middle of the night or day could see, you know, when your car license expired. Yeah. Boy, I remember those days. Everybody trying to do some U-turns. So anyway, basically, all of the infrastructure was already there. Basically, all you had to do now was to go ahead, get the scanner, which to the best of my knowledge, we bought that while I was still in office. Yes. And then you just needed an RF strip. And that RF strip is the same thing as on your license plate. It could have just went right at the top of your window, whatever, and the machine would still pick it up and tell the officers, you know, well, is it licensed or is it not licensed? Right. So the license plate thing is a bit dubious, Austin. Okay. Someone needs to look into that, because normally in government, you see, you got to be careful when government spends money, you know. As they say, you can't recycle unless you spend, right? Correct. So I'm a little concerned about that license plate, not to put too much shade over it, but I really don't know what the need was for a license plate. And that in itself created a big, what can I say, a big process in terms of renewing people's license plate. But either way, the RF strip was required. And so that infrastructure was really already there. Right. And in terms of the national ID, again, technically, all of that is there, because from the moment we created the ESID, you were getting that from the time you were getting your driver's license. I think it was also going to be being done in relation to your pension. And I think there might have been another one in terms of immigration. But basically, those ESIDs were being assigned. Yeah. So you went in and got your driver's license renewed. The ESID was already there. You already had an e-services ID, even if you didn't know about it. And And so it is important to know that infrastructure is there. It's just simply for whatever reason, they have now decided to come forward with an ID. And that ID is obviously going to be different for some reason than your driver's license, apparently. And again, that needs to be questioned. Well, why do I have to now have 2 driver's licenses?
Right.
Why am I not just clicking on one and saying, I know that your national ID tells me you have a driver's license? But again, all interesting. What I want to know to be able to address my concerns, and I know what is the concerns of other persons is, which is why I'm not prepared to speak about it too competently today, is that we need to look at the legislative framework around the national ID. In terms of, what are you going to allow people to do with this? What is government going to be allowed to do and not do? Like persons are legitimately concerned about things like like taxes. And quite frankly, you talk about people's initiative referendum. I think the people of this country really need to push to have enshrined in our Constitution that you're not going to get taxes. I really think that's what you should do.
Okay.
Especially, and let me just spend 5 more minutes on it, on the good news thing, especially when it comes to land tax, right? And the reason I want to stress this is because once you have land tax, you got to understand you're in servitude for life. You cannot escape the system. So let's just say you have income tax. Income tax is, as long as Austin Harris or the other guy driving and listening to me right now, as long as he's working, you pay income tax. But, maybe you're working hard to get a little piece of land, and then you're going to go out and farm it. You just want to get total off the grid. I want to come out of the system, Austin. Right. I'm tired of working. I'm tired of being a slave. Well, you got to understand, if there's land tax, if there's property tax, you will never escape that.
Right.
The whole concept
You'll always be on the grid. The
concept of you working or stopping work and just, I'm out of the system.
Right.
I'm free.
Right.
Will be gone. And if this means anything to anyone.
But isn't that really the way the world is heading, not just in the Cayman Islands context? It's getting harder and harder to go off grid.
Right, but this is where we can look around and see what's happening, and we should do our best to try to avoid the same thing happening to us.
Yes. I mean, just pointing out, technology is your thing. Technology tends to intimidate me, as I've stated before. But I remember having a conversation with a police officer once upon a time. And they said to me, folks are all worried, particularly when the license plates were going on. Saying people are worried about this, RF code on the license plate because it's scannable and it then is readable by detectors on the road. Fundamentally, notifying the police as to your position, your location. Yeah. And they said to me, you're worried about the wrong thing. The one thing that tracks location better than any device known to man thus far is something that every single member of the population carries in their pocket, and that's their cell phone.
Right.
And people talk about background apps or apps running in the background, whether you can choose them or not. Some of them are fixed. Again, that's another conversation for another day, whether fixed by the manufacturer or by the retailer or whatever. But your phone is a location tracking device just by nature of every time you connect to Wi-Fi. But I digress.
No, you make a good point. Good digression, Austin. And that's happening, whether arguably you have your location on or not. But I think the difference is that you would still have to go through certain processes, certain institution outside of Cayman to be able to get those locations. I'm pretty sure the local telco could help with that as well. But here you're actually talking to the point of RF. I mean, one of the thoughts was when I was in office is that you could see, and again, all this is where I talk about legislation, because you have to deal with issues like data protection. It's just like people having cameras all around the place. They're gathering information. You could have a guy on the side of the road somewhere getting a smooch. Who knows? I have no idea what you're doing. Maybe you're doing something, whatever.
Either way, it's private.
I don't even want to get into what you're doing.
Yeah, but this is private business.
Well, one can argue again that you're doing it in a public place, right? But even though you're doing it in a public place, there's data protection legislation that deals with you've captured it. What are you allowed to do with it?
Right.
Like, are you allowed to sell it to TikTok?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So even though you're in a public place, and generally we say if you're in a public place, then, well, you're subject to being filmed.
Right.
There's still something that wants to cover, and I don't mean cover up, deal with that particular instance. So it's now captured by a particular company because you were standing next to their camera at 3 a.m. in the morning, and then they simply can't release it. They can't simply say, hey, Mary, you might find this video interesting.
Just out of curiosity.
But basically, there was a whole idea that you could see, just like how you have cameras on poles, you could have RF readers, for example, in different areas in specific neighborhoods, right? Where again, if a crime is committed, one of the things that you could do, the crime was committed at 3 a.m. Well, I have an RF read of technically every 20 cars or whatever number of cars was there moving around at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Or at least past this particular point. So there's a lot of things that you can do that's beneficial, but clearly anything can be abused.
That's correct.
And what is important, and I want to say this, and I hope to be able to discuss this issue more effectively at another date.
Yeah.
But you need to look at the legislation. What is that legislation going to do in terms of your national ID and what's it going to be able to be used for, et cetera?
No,
about things like tax concerns, and someone wrote me today, I want to thank her very much for that. Please continue to send us texts, call in the program. But again, on the tax issue, which is something very, very important to me, because I believe God made us all free, men and women. And I don't think you should be tied up in the money system for life unless you want to. And I say that because I want to stress to everyone sitting and listening to me, understand it. If we get land tax, like a lot of other countries have, it means you will absolutely never, ever be free from the financial system. The concept of getting your little piece of land and going off the grid, you can just wipe that off. And so we as a people, I think, should actually be doing something about that.
Indeed.
And Austin, I know when we reach that magic hour of the no more good news, I want to start talking, and I'm hoping that we can have some lively discussion.
You can't
Good, sensible discussion.
You can't help yourself, can you? Not even 9 minutes left. You can't wait 9 minutes.
No, I'm not going to start it now. I'm just giving,
a taste.
Yeah, I'm just throwing it out there that I want to discuss the sexual harassment
Sampling,
thing.
so to speak.
I want to
tasting.
I think I'm looking at the green bill here. The public consultation
On the immigration white paper?
No, the sexual harassment.
Oh, yes.
I like to stir it properly. I like to stir it properly.
Yes, we have long been wanting to talk about that.
There is some things in here, and I know I'll get beat up, right?
You probably will.
I'll get beat up. These
individual.
misogynistic individuals in the studio.
Right. Right.
These men.
Well, careful now, because I support a lot of the initiatives.
I support a lot of things.
I think they're long overdue.
But
there are some cultural nuances that will certainly be interesting to see how they play out.
Well, I like just like when we raised the issue yesterday and you talked about earmarking specific things, the same way I throw out there to say, listen, let's not hog tie the government. Let's give them flexibility to be able to work to serve the people.
Right.
We can put checks and balances in place, but
that's what he's talking about in the green bill.
This
is not green anymore. It's actually a law, but this is what it was when it came to Parliament.
It's already approved now?
It's a law. It's a law.
It's in law now?
It's in law now. It was passed on February 6th.
Well, I don't know what they were thinking. So everyone gets a flogging on this one as far as I'm concerned.
I think they did it unanimously as well.
I'm not even...
19 people to... say, shame on you.
Well, that's fine. I don't mind being the odd one out. Make me number 20 in Parliament now, and I'm just disagreeing with
in this
the 19.
conversation, you might be the only one, as you say. Am I the only one that feels this way?
That's fine. You know what?
You have no problem with that.
You remember what used to be in the restroom in our old studio? There was a sign. I know.
Careful now.
I'm sorry.
Careful now again. Yeah. Careful again, Ellio. I'm just going to warn you one more time. We could have persons below the age of 18
no,
directly or indirectly.
This is perfectly.
I caution you again, sir. From the
this is G-rated.
Okay.
This is G-rated. I wish to assure you. No, there was a sign in the restroom, and I might not.
Can you feel my pain?
It was like when you got a voice message a couple of days ago, Ellio, I'm afraid to press play here.
I really am nervous.
I can't listen to this prior. But anyway, I assure you that this is G-rated. I'm just stating the facts that it was actually in the restroom. Why it was in the restroom, I don't know. And I am paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact quote, but I think you'll remember it when I say it.
Yes.
We were forced to stare at it, let's put it that way. Yes. And it said something to the effect that, you're not necessarily wrong because you're not doing what the majority is doing. Do you remember that?
Yes,
it was something to that effect.
Something to that effect. Yes, I can't recall precisely.
So, just because I'm different,
right,
and the majority is saying something else, I'm sorry, but that doesn't mean I'm incorrect.
Right.
Okay.
Sure.
And I'm happy to stand all alone by myself.
Sure.
As long as I believe I'm doing what is best.
Sure.
And what is right. Sure. Now let me just give you something. I'm not even going to get into the controversial stuff yet. The male-female stuff. We don't want people arguing in their cars. But here is a section. We're going to have them arguing all the way home. Hey, he's right, honey. He's right.
You really are caveman, aren't you?
Yeah, you're one of them. You're one of them. You're one of them. So listen to me here. Listen to me. On this particular piece of legislation, there is an anti-sexual harassment committee.
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's understand the makeup of the committee.
Yes.
Okay. Again, I'm sorry if I have to give you the bad news. But it has to have a chairman or a chairperson who has to be an attorney at law.
Part 3 of the law, yes, deals with that.
Right? Has to be an attorney at law, Austin.
Yes.
And for all the males and females listening to me, it has to be an attorney.
Yes. Matter of fact, both the chairperson and deputy chairperson.
Yeah, I'm getting to that. You're beating me. You're beating me, but it's fine.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Go ahead.
No, it's fine. You can join in. Then the deputy chairpersons, 2 deputy chairpersons, both of which also have to be attorneys at law.
Yeah.
And then it goes on to talk about, somewhat the regular committee members who have to have experience and qualifications. So don't even come out now from college and think that you're going to sit on this committee. Oh, no, buddy. You need to have experience and qualifications to sit on the committee.
Yes.
And that has to be qualifications in things such as, what was it again? I'm searching
Gender,
for
social development, human rights, or labor and human services.
All right.
You got human psychology. Hang on, the list is.
Go ahead. I'm right with you.
Organizational psychology.
Right.
Or human resource management.
So pause again. Yeah. Remember, must be an attorney at law to chair it. Must be an attorney at law to be the deputy chair of it, or the both deputy chairs of it, and have to have both experience and qualifications in what, Austin?
In gender, social development, human rights.
Put your mouth close to that mic.
Gender.
There you go. Yeah.
Social development. Human rights or labor, human services, human psychology, organizational psychology, or human resource management.
Here's what I want to say. Starting off this debate, right? All these male and female sitting in their car. And I know the majority are going to agree with me. We'll probably get a vociferous minority that makes a bit of a squeak. But let's just make it clear, right? What in tarnation, as the saying goes, why does an attorney at law have to chair the committee? Let's say I'm an attorney at law and I specialize in land law. Why does that make me special that I can chair the sexual harassment committee? Why do I need that for the deputy chair? The other one's a corporate lawyer. I don't know. This one specializes and I know whatever. Why is that? And the question is, don't you think that one good judge or group of judges as well, if you want to even have attorneys to throw them in, should be the layperson? Shouldn't the average guy be able to sit and say, I'm not sure if that qualifies as sexual harassment?
Right.
Why has the layperson been ruled out? Now, let's just understand how the courts work. You're charged with murder. Pretty important. You don't have to be an attorney at law to be a juror. You really want laypersons.
Right.
But not for the sexual harassment committee.
Yeah.
So I don't really understand that.
Well, if I could just throw
explain.
I can't begin to explain it. I didn't write the legislation, and certainly we are going to review it together. But I think that because of the nature of sexual harassment, let's just assume that there is a case, either in the workplace or otherwise, unless it is addressed at the workplace level, and that, of course, plays in the whole human resource management role of it. Unless companies find an amicable way to address sexual harassment, specifically in the workplace, where they make a woman or a man feel uncomfortable, hinders their upward mobility, et cetera, and the list goes on to highlight what some of the risks are or some of the otherwise inferred actions that would otherwise identify as sexual harassment. I think in the public domain, particularly where damages are traditionally awarded, and that's where it tends to go, this sexual harassment, and not just in the Cayman Islands, obviously for the first time, but the world over. When do you hear of cases of sexual harassment if it is not coming from the courts, whether it be at the summary court level or perhaps even also in some cases, obviously we're talking about those, the Me Too movement where the case of sexual harassment has gone on for decades, but we had no recompense for it until now. And, theoretically somebody could come out of the woodwork and say, well, I've been sexually harassed for the last 20 years in the same company by the same, manager or boss or otherwise. And I, not only do I want it to be acknowledged, I want compensation for it. And that compensation oftentimes may go further than what the employer might otherwise be able to satisfy the claimants, and that matter has to go to court. So I would suspect that if the law favors, is top-heavy for attorneys, that maybe a lot of the legislation itself will result in litigious complaints that will oftentimes, more so than not, end up before the courts.
And you feel that only a lawyer can do that?
Well, I certainly believe that the language of the law is different than perhaps, say, a layperson, and it certainly wouldn't hurt. Okay. We have 30 seconds left, Ellio, to make your point.
Well, no.
No, we're going to pause?
We're going to pause.
All right.
A quick break.
So interrupting the good news part of our Thursday with the otherwise a little bit sticky topic of the anti-sexual harassment law, which is where we're going to go to next. See, we start out with a plan, but sometimes that plan just gets scuttled.
And I want
and we head in a different direction. But keep it locked. There'll be more Straight Talk still to come. The phone lines are open, 745-2626, right here on Bobo FM.
The BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
The BBC World Service makes programs with a uniquely global perspective.
Enlighten us. Where do we start?
The latest world news and current affairs.
The very best in global arts and culture.
What has been happening on the financial markets today.
Social issues, political stories.
Everything was there in a way that I never heard before.
The BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
Welcome to our newsroom here in central London. We place ourselves here at a little desk right in the thick of things.
OS from the BBC.
We can catch the very latest news from our colleagues, not just in this enormous room, but also from our colleagues around the world.
I'm in the room where they're treating children.
This is a combat zone.
The situation after the typhoon is very complicated.
It was a very tense situation.
OS from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
BBC News.
BBC News.
World news from the BBC. Violent clashes.
Thick black smoke.
A tremendous legal victory.
Crucial elections.
Destructive wind.
A search and recovery operation.
A race against time.
An imminent threat.
Flying a drone over a rival team's training session.
Whatever is happening, wherever it's happening, catch up with the latest news bulletins from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM. This is Bobo FM, powered by Doctors Hospital. 24/7 urgent care, located in Georgetown at the top of Walker's Road. Introducing the Doctors Hospital Specialty Clinic, conveniently located in the Strand. To book your appointment at Doctors Hospital, call 325-9000. Across Cayman on 89.1 FM, online and on your smart speaker. The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
Hello, I'm Govinda Gill with the BBC News. Donald Trump says he's made lots of progress on ending Russia's war in Ukraine after talks at the White House with Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The president told reporters that peace between Moscow and Kyiv would either be fairly soon or not at all. Sir Keir said Mr. Trump had created a moment of opportunity, but warned that any peace deal must not reward the aggressor.
I think my views on Putin are pretty well rehearsed and pretty well known, and my concern is that if there's a deal, and I hope there is a deal, that it must be a lasting deal, that it's not a temporary measure, and that is why I think it's really important that Putin knows that this deal, a historic deal, which I very much hope comes about, is there, and it's a lasting deal.
The United States has announced that 29 alleged drug cartel members have been extradited from Mexico. The criminal group is known for its cruelty and ruthlessness and has been designated by the Trump administration as a terrorist group. Here's our Mexico correspondent, Will Grant.
It is considered the biggest such extradition of its kind, possibly in the history of Mexico's relentless drug war. They include the founders of the brutal Zetas cartel, Miguel Ángel Treviño and his brother, Omar Treviño. Known as Zeta 40 and Zeta 42, respectively, the two men ran the feared organisation for years before its eventual demise in the mid-2010s. Their criminal empire spanned a wide range of illicit activities, including cocaine smuggling, people trafficking, extortion, gun running and kidnappings.
The imprisoned founder of the Kurdish militant group, the PKK, has called for his group to lay down its arms and end its 4-decade struggle against the Turkish state. Abdullah Öcalan said he was responding to a new environment in Turkey. Emily Wither reports from Istanbul.
If they do lay down their arms, this will have huge regional implications for stability. But already we've heard from the Syrian Democratic Forces. This is a Kurdish-led group in northeastern Syria. Turkey sees them as linked to the PKK. They have said that this call does not apply to them, only to the PKK. This will be very disappointing for Turkey, who does not want this group to continue on their border. And it's a sign that despite this major announcement today, regional tensions will continue.
HIV charities in South Africa have called on the government to step in to fill in the gap left by the sudden cancellation of US aid. The Trump administration cut its HIV programs overnight. South Africa, where almost 8 million people live with the condition, was the biggest beneficiary. The American program was designed to give some of the world's poorest people access to antiretroviral drugs. BBC News. Police in New Mexico investigating the death of the 2-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman alongside his wife say they're treating the deaths as suspicious but don't suspect foul play. The Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office said the couple had been dead for a while. The Israeli military has published its first official account of what it described as the mistakes that led to its failure to protect Israeli civilians during the October the 7th attacks by Hamas. The report highlights complacency about Hamas's military capabilities, with Gaza viewed as a secondary threat compared to Iran and Hezbollah. The US space company Blue Origin has announced plans for an upcoming all-female flight on its New Shepard rocket. Those on board will include Blue Origin owner Jeff Bezos' fiancée, Lauren Sanchez, the pop star Katy Perry and the civil rights activist Amanda Wen. No specific date has been set for the launch. Scientists in Italy say they've confirmed they've found the only known case of a human brain or any organic matter turning to glass. Small chunks of black glass were found in 2020 inside the skull of a young man killed by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius nearly 2,000 years ago. Here's Georgina Ranard.
A human brain turned to glass by a volcano. It sounds like bad science fiction. And when archaeologists first found glass fragments inside a skull in ancient Herculaneum in Italy, they were mystified. They deduced that the pea-sized chunks of black glass were the fossilised remains of the brain of a man aged about 20. Scientists from the University Roma Tre say that a huge ash cloud rushed down the mountain, enveloping the victim. It heated up his brain to at least 510 degrees Celsius before rapidly cooling.
That's the latest BBC News.
The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo FM.
And welcome back, K-Man. We're your hosts, Austin Harris.
And I'm Ellio Solomon.
And together we welcome you back to our now 53 minutes, give or take, of uninterrupted talk here on Straight Talk, where we dispense with the good news and tackle some of the otherwise ticklish, controversial, or, for lack of a better word, hot topics that are oftentimes debated in the public domain. Today is no exception. Certainly today reminds us as hosts to be ready for anything at any time because a conversation can come out of the blue, and the only responsibility we have is to be able to at least conversationally have that conversation, and hopefully with the help of the listening audience. Do you hear me pleading to you? Please, someone help me. Ellio's going to go off on a rant. The phone lines are at 745-2626.
What a friend
I'm just kidding. What a friend. They say you won't fleas bite you the hardest.
Yeah.
745
I thought I had a friend here.
You do have a friend. 745-2626. Let me finish with the audience first now.
Oh, go ahead.
745. See, they call in already. They know the number. Let's go to the phone line.
There you go.
Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
2626.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for your call. We are on the subject of anti-sexual harassment. Is that why you're
on
calling
the tribunal now?
Okay, well, I didn't got that one. I just go and find out what's going on with the man that was saying about Kimanian riffraff. That was just like for a period of time, Cayman people protest off.
Oh.
That man needed to be an example for Cayman.
Is that a riffraff comment? Yeah.
Yes.
Chris Albers, I think it was.
Yes.
It was just on my mind. I said just like they was just on it like for a couple of days and then it died out.
Yes. Yes. That certainly seemed to be the case.
So that's where Kimanya needs to stand up. This man needed to be example. They needed to make him an example. They need to make him an example.
Put him on a plane is what you're saying.
I don't know what I want to do with him, but they need to make him an example.
Plane or a small boat? Come on. You got to have a recommendation
with
somewhere.
A little hole in the back, one oar.
I mean,
best of luck to you.
A big thing. It was a big thing.
Cubans do it every day. I don't see why you can't.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I call fine. I just see if could I get a topic back on that. I don't know.
All right. Thank you so much for your call. To the caller's point, I mean, it did sort of just, fizzle out. There was a loud kaboom for a while. Protests, and it was all the rage on certain talk shows. People were toxicated.
That's what I heard.
We do have another caller on the line. Let's go to the phone lines. Good evening, caller. You're on the air.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's Alice May. How are you gentlemen doing?
Oh, very good.
Fantastic. What a pleasure it is to have you on the other end of the phone line. Thank you for listening and tuning in.
Yes. WhatsApp came through, and I pressed the button, and then I heard the two of you talking.
Yes.
And the little bit I caught where you were talking about the ID card.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and
that was how we began.
Yes, and then the fares or whatever. My understanding, and of course I might not be right, but my understanding of the benefit of the ID card, it makes sense to me. Now, remember when you wanted to go and open a little bank account or anything like that, you had to have 2 government-issued IDs, your passport, driver's license, voter, whatever, a light bill that showed where your home address is and everything, various pieces of paper you had to take around with you, maybe your job letters and everything like that. And, of course, for Caymanians, generational, all Caymanians are wonderful people, but the traditional generational Caymanians, we didn't have anything to prove that we were really Caymanians.
Yes, ma'am.
Remember?
Yes.
And your children would have to go and get an acknowledgement out of the immigration department that you are Caymanian, etc., when they're doing scholarship applications and the whole 9 yards.
Yes.
My understanding is that this ID card, this national ID card that was an article about it yesterday, that will be multi-purpose because it will have information on it that says, it has your address, your name, your date of birth, or whatever else you need like that. And it will also give your immigration status. It'll say that Austin is a real Caymanian, as we used to say, right? And in the Corner Walk, Hospital Road and Elgin Avenue and all like that, remember? Wherever you lived, and Ellio as well. So it will have that. That one little card will serve a multitude of purposes. Prove where you live. You're a Caymanian. It's going to be helpful. I could be misunderstanding, but I doubt it. Not up until today, I was speaking with someone. I said, I gather it's coming out again. And as the article said, it's going to be rolled out sort of in certain government departments and the civil service, and then it'll ultimately get to us. It is not a compulsory card. It is voluntarily.
Yeah.
But I feel that it would do everyone good to have it if it's going to help you in all the many ways now that we walk around with half our filing cabinet and our handbag to prove that we're who we say we are and that we can look at this bank account that's been in our name for donkey's years. And yes, I do live so-and-so. So this card should be most useful, especially for young people when we think of their education and all those different things, and the older persons. That's my take on it and my understanding, and I hope that I'm not misleading people, but I'm not saying the duppies hiding in the bush as some may be seeing it. And we talk about we may get taxed for land. I hope not. I don't need anything at a retired age. Anyway, gentlemen, I will leave you be now. But I thought I should share that little piece.
Thank you very much. And you're not wrong. Certainly the benefits that you outlined were at the initial thought, the thinking as to what it would otherwise serve. And you're absolutely correct. We got obviously carried away on the technical aspect of the conversation, but you are absolutely right. And I thank you for sharing those viewpoints and facts, if you will, in terms of how it will, in fact, make life easier, or at least we hope it will make life easier.
Yeah, and again, I thank her very much for calling. First of all, it's really great to hear her voice and knowing that, persons, I can reverse it. Persons of that caliber is listening to us as well. Greatly appreciate it. I would say a couple of things in response to that. One, I wish to stress, as I mentioned earlier on, for the benefit of those particularly who may just be chiming in, it was sent to me in a text by someone who expressed a concern, amongst other things, that, hey, is this going to be used for some nefarious purpose, whether it's going to be taxes or otherwise. And let's be clear about it. There's a legitimacy, as far as I'm concerned, in that concern. And I think that those things can get covered by legislation, because in the same way that the good little lady is saying to us that it would be beneficial for us not having to carry 2 pieces of ID, for example, to the bank, well, in the same way, it will also be efficient and effective in being able to be used for other things.
Right.
And I think that would be covered under legislation. So I look forward to finding that and being able to speak quite effectively on it on another date.
Right.
But I do want to add another thing onto that. When she talks about the fact that you have 2 IDs, one of the things that continue to annoy me with that is the fact that they did ask you for 2 IDs a lot of times when you're opening up your bank account. For example, they want a driver's license and passport. A lot of that, honestly, never really made a lot of sense to me. Even going to the bank, for example, and they're saying to you, I'd love to have that discussion too. Oh, but sorry, your driver's license is expired. Well, are you here to check to see if I still have a driver's license, or is this a legitimate government ID?
Right.
I couldn't understand that, right? But anyway, maybe it's just me again.
Well, it wouldn't be a legitimate government ID if it had expired.
Oh, that's what a record is?
Well, that's generally what the excuse is.
So that means that means you have a passport, absolutely no benefit. Passport's expired. Just chuck that away, hand it over to someone else.
You can't travel on an expired passport.
No, you can't travel on it, but it's a government ID.
Right.
It is a government ID.
Right.
A government ID doesn't necessarily have to have an expiry on it. It might have an expiry, but it is it's something that government stamps and says, this is like a birth certificate. This is an official government birth certificate.
But again, from the liability perspective, if you're providing a passport as an ID confirmation purposes and it is expired, certainly there could be made the case that says, well, it could have been revoked between the time it expired and the time you showed up at my counter.
That would be your driver's license, not your ID.
Your passport.
Well, again, it would be talking about whether you're talking about your passport or you're talking about an ID.
Okay.
An ID is what? Something that identifies you. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So even if I stand there and somebody actually took me as the Bible and I said, that's Austin Harris, then I would be identifying you, right? Whether you have a driver's license, in my opinion, or whether you have a legitimate passport in terms of, can you use it to fly is a totally different thing. But that's just my view. But on to this particular piece about the tribunal and the sexual harassment. I hear the point you raised, but I think that just like when we had Mr. Bryan in the studio, when we were chatting about marijuana at the time, and I said, I think you should have some laypersons on that committee. I think he expressed and said, that's a good idea. I never thought of that. Well, I'm going to suggest something similar happen here. I don't have a problem with having lawyers, even though this is saying that the purpose of this is the tribunal shall hear and determine complaints relating to acts of sexual harassment that are submitted to the tribunal under this act.
Yes.
That's fine. If you want to have some lawyers, it's fine. What I think is missing here is the importance of having a lay person lend their voice, lend their advice to this particular committee.
Right. And
I think it is important on this committee. I think it's important on a juror. I think it's important at all times. And that is what I'm concerned about, because we overlook the average guy and the importance of what his or her opinion is.
Okay, fair enough. We do have a voicemail comment, I mean a WhatsApp voice note, so let's hear it.
Yes, Austin and Ellio, Alice did make a great point there in regard to the requirements on a national ID. Now, I think what people need to bear in mind is that a national ID is actually what is supposed to be a government ID. In the United States, if you have a government ID, the government ID is just a government ID, or if you have a driver's license where you license to drive, that driver's license is also a government ID, and you can take that to the bank and open up an account with it. That has everything on there. There is also a strip on that ID that tells whether a person is eligible to be able to work in that country or that city or state. So I think that whoever is going to be doing, creating these IDs, they need to bear in mind that, of course, you have a photo of the individual represented on that ID, and also their date of birth, whether they are a person that is authorized to work in the country, or if they're a citizen. Okay, of course, who naturally is authorized to work, and it shows their date of birth, where they live, physical address, not no PO box. Has to be a physical address to assist the police in their work, in their policing. And I don't know if you all want to go as far as putting the race, whether you're black or white or whatever. Cayman is so confused as far as acceptance of who they really are, having African roots. And then there is preference to acknowledge European roots, but not African roots. So I don't know how you all going to deal with that. You just have to look at the photo and decide who the person really is and what they physically look like and who you're looking for in case the police needs to track these people down. But basically, those are the features that should be displayed on that ID. Of course, is their photo, their date of birth, and their physical address, no PO box, physical address, and whether they are authorized to work in the country. That should be showed on the ID, whether it is a strip, a color strip. You might have a color strip for green, which means a go-ahead, that the person is authorized to work, or you might need to put a red strip there on it, showing that they are not authorized to work yet. And when the person gets their work permit or whatever, they can go and have it updated, and then they put the green strip on there, meaning the go-ahead that they are authorized to work in the country. But that would be a check and a balance that would be realized into creating that ID as well.
All right. Well, we thank that listener for sharing their feedback on it. And just to state, the cards will have certain specific information. This, of course, coming from the press release that was issued, saying that it will provide both physical and digital proof of a person identity and include the cardholder's photograph, name, date of birth, sex, immigration status, and unique card ID number, with additional optional information available on a scannable QR code. So that, I guess that suggests it is scalable, and like all things, this is the first rollout. So I assume that, you know, it can be expanded once they work out all of the kinks. But we certainly thank the listener for sharing that feedback as well. Ellio?
Yeah, well, again, I separate ID. And by the way, I would stress, you know, on the expiration matter, I think an ID is as the person is identified. I think it starts at the basics and you can keep adding to it. But an identification is simply a matter of the information that I need to be able to identify that this is Austin Harris. And this is where I talked about earlier on with the e-government stuff that some people might not want to listen to. It was about understanding. Let me just tell you something. I remember I was traveling with Mr. Bush at the time. Love to get into that. And we actually asked a person, let me put it that way, nobody gets in trouble, can you tell us how many McKeever Bushes are traveling. And I can't remember how much it was, but it was a very large amount of persons, actually named McKeever Bush, that were traveling.
Really?
I was surprised. Yeah.
Wow. I thought that was a rather unique name.
Now, when I say, hey, it might be odd, I said, how many Ellio Salmons are traveling? Well, there was only one. But the bottom line of
I
it
could
is,
have told her that.
yeah, but the bottom line of it is that here's the simple point I'm trying to make, is that you might have an Austin A. Harris, an Austin B. Harris, and the list goes on. And you need to be able to verify that. And I have a picture, I have a name, I have the full name, etc. And when government issues you that, that's your ID. So I have someone texting me, for example, saying that they didn't accept their voter ID because it wasn't a legitimate ID. It is a legitimate ID. Because if it wasn't a legitimate ID, you wouldn't be able to use it to vote.
Correct.
What, are you looking for an expiration date on the voter's ID? It's nonsense. Okay? And banks can tell you any palaver they want to give you. You don't need an expiration date. Now you can say, you know, you no longer look like this photograph. You need to give me something a little bit more up to date. But especially if the person is standing there looking like the spirit and image of the picture on the ID, and it actually stamped by the elections office. It's a government ID. It is a legitimate government ID. And we know it's legitimate because government uses it themselves to allow you to vote. You know, it's just a pile of nonsense. And unfortunately, elected officials allow them to keep getting away with that nonsense. So either way, on top of the national ID, I'm sure it serves a lot of benefits. Again, I think it will serve a lot of benefits. The infrastructure was put in place to be able to accommodate things like the national ID. I'll take the blame or the praise for it. And at the same time, what I'm simply saying is it is also subject, as some persons are concerned, for abuse. And you want to make sure that the legislation fixes that problem. We talked earlier on about cameras on buildings. Cameras on buildings are recording things that some persons might actually want to remain private.
Right.
And it's not because you're doing something wrong. Austin Harris might simply not want anyone to know that he was standing outside a particular building at 7 p.m. last night just sitting in his car.
Wouldn't those concerns, though, be addressed in the Data Protection Act?
But that's, yeah, and precisely my point.
Yeah.
So a data protection law is going to be sitting and saying, hey, you know, you can't go and share that information that Austin was sitting there at 7 p.m. last night. You can't do it. And so we need the legislation around all of these things to make sure it offers the checks and balances and the proper protection. So, yeah, on this particular piece, just moving on from the tribunal, I completely agree to having legal expertise on there, all the things that they list. I think what is being overlooked is the fact that you should have some laypersons on there.
Right.
You see, because if I take it to the court, which is the ultimate arbitrator, right? The ultimate arbitrator is the court. And it is nothing better and more fundamental to justice than to be judged in a court of law by your peers, right? Because it is your peers that you sit there and say, he or she can be empathetic. They can also not be empathetic. They can look and sit and say, what would I, as the reasonable man test, / woman, what would I have done? That is why they can sit and make the determination, as a matter of fact, that says, I think you murdered the guy. Because I think if I was in your position, I wouldn't have done that. And nobody else can do that but the juror, the layperson, the average guy. That is the reasonable man test. What would the average guy do?
Right.
And I'm asking you now, on this tribunal, where is the average man?
Yes.
Where is the reasonable man that says, I am the average man? I am the only one that can tell you what the average man would have done.
Right.
And I think is seriously missing. So sorry to hear that this is already out of the gate, but I think somebody should make a revision there. And I want to get generally into all this issue about this, the sexual harassment stuff, because you talked about nuances. Maybe you can share some that you particularly had so that I don't have to take the floor first.
Well, no, I mean, I just want to address this point first. I would agree with you 100% that there is absolutely room for the layperson's perspective.
Yeah.
The point I was making, and again, it's my belief, that the scope under which this law covers, because it extends far past just professional relationships. It is certainly a all-encompassing legislation, if you will call it as such, and you take it from the act itself, but also the instances that the law defines could be taken as sexual harassment may be subjective to one point of view, but arguably, if it is not resolved in the confines of an employment contract, i.e., within your place of business, it does require your employer to put in place certain, safeguards.
Yeah, they have to put a harassment policy together.
So this is not something that employers can ignore. It's like pension and health. It's mandatory. This is now part of the professional relationship contract
know that right now?
Between employer and employees. But I think, to your point, and so I say to you that why we have the requirement for one or more lawyers on the commission, and it's not commission, what is it called? The committee?
Tribunal.
Tribunal, thank you. I want to make sure I get the right nomenclature. The tribunal is because the crafters of this legislation may have been of the view that the courts may very well serve to be the ultimate arbitrator in the outcome of any of these sexual harassment claims. So, which on the one hand will, of course, increase the volume an already overburdened court system, but that's a conversation for another day. But why do I say so? And I don't want to go straight to the law, because Part 2 talks about what protection this act is seeking to provide. It says acts that would constitute sexual harassment include making an unwelcome sexual advance towards a person, making an unwelcome sexual comment to a person, making an unwelcome sexual comment about a person in their sight and hearing, making an unwelcome sexual gesture to a person, providing a person with unwelcome sexual images or graphics, making it appear to the person seeking employment. Now, again, the whole word of appear in and of itself is subjective. Making it appear to a person seeking employment that the offer of employment or the terms of employment are contingent on the person's acceptance of sexual advances. Making it appear, again, that a person will receive preferential treatment or other advantage in the employment context only, directly or indirectly engaging in any form of unwelcome conduct of a sexual nature. So those are the, primary aspects. But again, when I said this protection extends way past the employment contract in the workforce. Clause 11, Clause 12, Clause 13. Clause 11 provides that this law shall provide to persons who supply goods and services or facilities for benefit of the public or a section of the public. Clause 12 provides that a landlord shall not subject a tenant to sexual harassment. Clause 13 prohibits sexual harassment in a course of transactional related processes. So you're buying and selling, whether it be land or a car or whatever. So all of these areas makes this law very broad in its scope in terms of who it applies to. And, with the exception of the two areas that use the word appear, because again, appear in my mind is what may appear to you as an offensive nature may not have been my intention in saying it. Yep. But then who is the arbitrator of that? And again, you can say, well, that will be your employer or where you are. But if you're outside of work, then it's the courts. And if it's going to the court, certainly the tribunal first will have to answer the question, well, is it sexual harassment? If they recognize that this will potentially, overburden the courts and the legal system, which is already overburdened, then the obligation then falls on the tribunal in identifying what is or is not sexual harassment. To your point, I agree. The layperson, by all means, can offer a contribution to it. But the legal language that would otherwise constitute a legal claim that would stand up in court is a language that not everybody speaks. And therefore, lawyers, attorneys, those skilled in that profession would best be served.
And just for clarity, we're on the same page, because we're definitely not disagreeing that you should have lawyers that would be able to sit here and read and best interpret what this legislation was trying to achieve.
Right.
And to make aid in that decision. I'm simply saying, just like with respect to your jurors, and you have a judge that proceeds over them and informs them on matters of the laws they need to consider in their decision-making process. Equally, I believe the same thing should be being done here at the tribunal. And again, even to your point, if you're trying to perhaps avoid over-exhausting the courts, then all the more reason that you should do your best to mimic, replicate a little court called the tribunal down here that does a job so thorough that it doesn't have to go to the courts.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think that it's just unfortunate that laypersons were not employed. So amongst other things, as I mentioned in relation to the marijuana issue, I'll mention the same thing here. It is most unfortunate that that particular thing was not involved. But, there are a lot of different things inside of here, and I think I don't know how much is worth discussing right now, to be quite honest, because I actually went. For those who can't see, I'm waving my law around, but it's green.
Yes.
It's green, and it's normally green. They probably wanted it black, but anyway, it's green.
Might be the brown.
It's green, so therefore that means that this is actually something that's still out for consultation. It's a green bill here, right? And when this is actually into law, then they put it on a white piece of paper. I am not surprised.
Right.
But my friend is telling me that this is already passed.
Yes. Well, it passed on the 6th. It passed. According to the parliamentary record, it passed on the 6th of February in Parliament, and then according to the government website, it became an act on or before I want to say the 16th of February.
Which makes
that means that it has.
If it has become an act,
the elected threshold, and then as with everything, with every law or bill that is voted on in favor in Parliament, it then has to be assented to by the governor. The governor has to say, okay, I see you voted for this. I agree with you. And it shall then, after the governor's assent, does it become an act or a law?
Yeah.
And all of that appears at face value to have happened. But I take your point. If you picked up this act today, if you went to the Parliament today and received it, they should not have handed you a green piece of paper.
I got this one today.
It should have been white.
So I got this, and I was under the impression again that the horse was still still corralled.
Yes.
but apparently the horse is out of the gate.
Confusion now.
Yeah. Apparently the horse is already out of the gate. So I'm not quite sure how meaningful this is in terms of having this discussion. But either way, I think it's something that should be ventilated because maybe because I was asleep for the last 4 years. I've been doing this. I mean, after 2021, I just really wanted to. I didn't read newspapers. I tried my best to relax my mind, Austin. Not agitate myself by reading some nonsense. So maybe I missed it, but I didn't recall hearing any sort of rigorous debate, if you like, on this whole issue.
Yes.
Maybe I missed
it. Well, rigorous. I don't know if it go as far as calling it rigorous.
I mean, public.
In the public. It did occupy a few hours. In the public or not in the Parliament?
In the public domain.
Oh, in the public domain. I'm willing to argue.
Again, I love hearing from laypersons. I don't know why.
I'm willing to argue again when we think about, what is the purpose of this show for some individuals. I won't even call the title he gave himself, but for some individuals, what is the purpose of the show?
Mm-hmm.
And that's my point. These discussions have been noticeably absent from the public domain, in my opinion, in many respects, which is why I would agree with you. This is why you haven't heard about it outside of if you make the laborious effort to tune in to the parliamentary dialogues and debates as they're happening. Because not only does 10 o'clock mean absolutely nothing on an agenda. So we shall begin at 10 o'clock, but that means nothing in government terms.
Right.
10 o'clock could be 12, 2, it could be the next day.
Let little issues like time get in the way.
It's like saying don't let a little issue like facts get in the way of a good conversation.
Don't let facts ruin our argument.
No, exactly. But yeah, I mean, unless you're, well, like me, I have no life, then you won't be tuning into these things. But yeah, it was actively debated in Parliament. But to your point, the wider public either have no knowledge or even care because it has not been properly ventilated to the point that this is important.
Yeah.
And like I said, this sexual harassment, people think, it's just a work thing. No, it's not a work thing. No. It's an everyday life thing. And that is where the nuances of cultural, like I said, I'm a hugger.
I am a hugger.
I see somebody, how are you? Meet you the first time. If I feel a good vibe, we shall give you a hug, hello or goodbye. That may appear to the receiver as unwelcome. This is sexual harassment. But that wasn't my intention. That was just, hi, how are you? That's me. But that's what I mean as one example. And then who is going to decide whether I'm right or they're right or I'm wrong and, nothing but a pervert and should be, penalized.
You shouldn't have even said hi, Austin.
I shouldn't even have said hi. And then what are we creating?
Because when you said hi, I knew where you were going.
I knew where you were going before you even continued.
I know where your thoughts were at.
But again, that's also subjective. So again,
And they get to make the claim, and then you have to sit, worst case, in front of the tribunal to determine if your high was going somewhere.
Right. We do have a voice note on WhatsApp, and just, again, this good opportunity. The phone lines are open at 745-2626. You can call in and add your voice to our otherwise conversation. But if talking isn't your thing, or more importantly, you're saving your valuable credits is more important, you can contact us via our WhatsApp line by dialing 928-2562. There you can send us a voice note, or you can send us the traditional WhatsApp text message. In this case, we have another voice note. Let's go to it.
In regard to the landlord, and how they should be governed in regard to the sexual harassment law. That landlord-tenant law is something all by itself that needs to be taken care of. It urgently needed that a landlord-tenant law be drafted and created there for the benefit of landlords and tenants. For years, landlords have visited their tenants on their job, hunting them down for rent and come into their houses all hours of the night and just doing as they please, entering into the people's domain without authorization, without notice. In the United States, if a landlord dare enter your premises that you rent, they are arrested for burglary. And it should be the same in the Cayman Islands. There is too much slackness going on with the landlord-tenant law, and it needs to be looked into very seriously.
All right. Thank you very much for that comment. And again, this might be an issue for the, obviously, next government to take on board, but the caller is referring to what we used to know as the Landlord Tenancy and Residency Act, or law, is in fact called, and it was last amended in 2009, called the Residential Tenancy Law 2009. But in the present circumstance where things such as, the rents were increasing exponentially since 2021, arguably, or since certainly COVID, a lot of conversation has taken place in the public domain in terms of what are a landlord's rights and or obligations, and likewise, what sort of rights do tenants have, suggesting that the residential tenancies law is in need of perhaps another reboot, to the caller's point.
Mm-hmm.
So 745-2626 is the number. If any of the topics we are touching on today is of interest, by all means, lend your view, your thoughts, your comments to that discussion. Some more good news, I guess, in a sense. Well, it is good news, and I'll just throw it in there. Cayman imported more than $415 million worth of goods in the third quarter last year, according to figures recently released.
How much?
$415 million worth of goods. The ESO said that the figure for July and September 2024 was up 9.1% compared to the same period last year. The change reflects a 16.2% jump in petroleum-related imports, as well as an 8% increase in the value of non-petroleum goods. Imports on tobacco and tobacco products largely led the way, with a 46.9% increase, specifically over just a 3-month period. Other notable categories include the food and live animals category, which crept up by 1.1% to 65 million. Interestingly, imports from U.S., Japan, Jamaica, Germany were all up, as those from South Korea and Switzerland, but imports from UK, Cuba, and Mexico dropped. Also, interestingly enough, in terms of regional trade, and again, I think the Honorable Premier just recently got back from a forum that was dealing, I think it was a CARICOM forum, dealing specifically with regional trade and regional partnerships. But imports from Jamaica into the Cayman Islands went up by 24.6%, from 12.6 million to just over 15 million.
Now curious minds are saying, what exactly did we import from Jamaica?
Well, it's not what you're thinking. Probably I would suspect it would be agricultural materials, maybe even fruits and vegetables. No, I'm not referring to you specifically, but certainly to
the proverbial person.
The proverbial person listening in within the sound of our voices.
Yeah.
Another interesting factor, which is why I say is not all good news, but certainly as a revenue earner,
right,
it is really good. And to your point yesterday, you know, in terms of how this country, you know, pays tax or charges tax, you're taxed on, you know, what you buy and what you get and what you import. You know, so it's sort of a consumption tax, if you will, but not a true consumption tax because you're not taxed, well, at the point of sale when you go to the supermarket, but that product on the supermarket shelves were taxed at the point of importation. But they do hide it, quite right. But also in the ESO report, the value of passenger vehicles jumped by almost 17%, from 15.4 million to almost 18 million compared to the same quarter in 2023. So that means we're getting a lot more high-end vehicles, obviously vehicles with a high sticker price. But it doesn't mean high-end because if you look at what a Ford F-150 costs today compared to 4 years ago, you might consider that obviously a significant jump in price. And certainly that Ford F-150 would hardly be identified as a luxury vehicle, though, again, in certain trims they may be. But I think what is more pertinent here when we look at the value of increasing vehicle prices being up is we also have to recognize that the number of vehicles imported to this country also grew for yet again another year. And I only throw that in because obviously it's a contributing factor to the traffic congestion problem. And I take on board a comment that was made by one of our callers and hopefully soon to be one of our guests, and I'll call his name, Mr. Mario Ebanks, when he suggested that perhaps I share with the listening audience some of the recommendations that sought to address the traffic congestion problem, which regrettably was curtailed by COVID. You know, we were making some positive progress on the issue of traffic, and I thought, you know, the committee made some really strong progress in terms of recommendations.
How's that?
How's what?
How did they make the progress? What progress were they making? Or is that something that Mario's going to come in and explain?
Well, no, that's something I'm going to explain.
Oh, okay.
I was going to suggest that when I take his advice,
I see,
and share the details of the work of that committee, the recommendations of that committee, and what could have been in place today had COVID not occurred, I think it would be a useful discussion. So I will take him up on it, and who knows, maybe I'll throw that in the mix tomorrow when we, you know, engage in another open mic Friday.
A nice Friday ventilation topic.
Quite right.
Sounds like a plan, Mr. Harris.
But revenue is up on the import side, so customs, you know, obviously, you know, again, leading the way. And again, this is another opportunity to point out the conversation we had on financial services versus tourism versus other revenue earners. Yes, financial services is contributing the most, bar none.
Right.
Arguably, one could suggest that the increase in luxury vehicles may come as a direct result of the increase in contributions of financial services. But, you know, there are other ways to, you know, where there are affluent persons working, but financial services certainly is king. But nonetheless, the way this country derives revenue, other sources are also just as important. Tourism, very important, stay over or cruise. Obviously, import duties on everybody who lives there, consumption is another important revenue earner. So, you know,
But see, to me, the higher that number goes, all the more important the other ones are. Because it would be like any one of us sitting here listening and saying, I make all my money from my job.
Right.
Well, that's all the more reason to get money coming from somewhere else.
That's right. Good point. Very good observation.
You might walk in tomorrow and your boss tells you, you're fired.
Right. Then what are you going to do?
Right. So the more that we're making from financial services only begs us to stop putting all your eggs in one basket. Get some diversification going on.
And with the challenges that we keep getting placed under on the subjectively, largely politically motivated FATF, and where one day we're in compliance, the next day we're not, we're on a gray list, then we're not. You know, all of these things have financial implications, specifically to the financial services sector. To your point, it could be here today, gone tomorrow, and very quickly.
I can only pray to God, and my good friend Trump doesn't say anything against Cayman. We're having some capital movement.
Yeah, well, we can only hope that we got Trump's money as well. So therefore, he's hoping that he'll keep us, you know, off his radar, so to speak. But it is, 5:47 in studio is the time, giving us just over 11 minutes before we have to pause and check in with the BBC News. But the phone lines are open at 745-2626, or you can just shoot us a WhatsApp message, or you can shoot us a WhatsApp voice note. Either way, we would love to hear.
You got to read this one about men accused of burglary cleared of all charges. I don't know if that ties in with people breaking into people's cars, but it seems like it's got some alignment.
Okay. Tell us about it.
This one man, yeah, I haven't read it, but I'm looking at this here. I'm just wondering what this is. 2 men walked free from court on Wednesday after a grand court jury cleared them of a string of burglary charges.
Mm-hmm.
The 7-strong jury came back after 3 hours and 20 minutes. That's very important. 3 hours and 20 minutes, and delivered unanimous not guilty verdicts on James McLean and Devon Wright. Justice Emma Peters, after she checked there was nothing else that needed to be dealt with, said, quote, "In that case, gentlemen, you're free to go." And by the way, that's again that jury thing, that layperson thing, right or wrong. Inconsistencies in a variety of statements made by main prosecution witness Romario Brown to the police, including different times and confusions over clothing worn by the defendants, a key point. Key points were highlighted by defense counsel earlier in the trial. A statement of facts agreed by the defense and prosecution was read to the jury by Crown Counsel Shauna K. James on Monday. The document said on the owner of a targeted house on Anibonny Crescent, who had surprised the burglars, had contacted prosecutors and said he could identify one of the intruders. A total of 12 photographs were shown to the homeowner on the 14th of February, including one of Mr. McLean. Brown had testified McLean had been in the house with him during the burglary when the owner returned home and caught the raiders red-handed. James told the jury the homeowners did not pick McLean out of the lineup of photographs, but chose an image of another man. Peters, in her first jury trial in Cayman, told the jury it was up to them to weigh the evidence and decide whether the case against the two had been proven. She told the jury that Brown was, quote, the main witness, virtually the only witness in this case. Peters warned them, quote, if you cannot be sure that Romario Brown is telling the truth about any or all of these allegations, then you must find them not guilty. End of quote. Brown, who pleaded guilty to offenses in connection with burglaries and is serving a 7-year sentence, implicated McLean and Wright in the crimes and insisted he had been coerced into taking part. Wright faced 2 charges of burglary and 1 of aggravated burglary, and McLean was charged with 1 offense of burglary and 1 of aggravated burglary. Brown claimed he and Wright committed the first on Georgetown's Glens Eden Road on the 31st of January 2022, and 2 others just a day later. 1 on Shamrock Road in Savannah, and the other on Anibonny Crescent off South Sound Road, along with McLean. So it sounds like somebody made an error on the fingering.
Those who were before the docs got set free.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I won't call it a technicality, but to your point, if you can't prove one or any of these facts, then you have to acquit.
Yeah, the argument
don't fit.
The argument would say, if you didn't get that one right, I'm not sure how much we can believe on the other ones.
Right.
And you see, the thing is that arguably one could say it was a legitimate error, but
yes.
We take you on the veracity of your statement, sir, and you made an error there.
Mm-hmm.
Many must have conclusion that maybe the rest is going to be an error as well.
Yeah, perhaps indeed. Again, that legal jargon and those that speak it obviously being showcased there in that news story. About
that's
7 minutes,
lawyers,
30
Austin.
Seconds before we, pardon me?
I said, that's them lawyers, Austin.
That's them lawyers, boy. I tell you what do you call 100 lawyers at the bottom of the sea?
Don't say it. I have lawyers in the family.
So do I, actually. So do I.
So he's
one of the best lawyers that I know.
So you know it was just a good joke.
He is. He's fantastic.
No, not him being a good lawyer was a good joke. The one that you were going to make about at the bottom of the sea.
You know what? He would probably agree with it, too. He would find it funny, and he would probably say, yeah, you're not
There's
wrong.
some merit.
There's some merit to that, because I tell you what, you got lawyers, coming out of the woodwork almost every other day, it would seem.
So I will just say, amongst other things, that on this piece of legislation, I guess I should say to all of the persons who are there as malinformed as I am, that you need to have a sexual harassment policy. So this is for all businesses. Again, now understanding that you're increasing arguably a little bit of the cost, but I think we'll wait and get all the specifics for you. But there is something on this piece of legislation that aids in guiding you in actually creating one. Right. But technically, everyone who has a business, and let me stress, this would mean whether you have 300 employees or whether you have 2. Right. Or maybe even if you have 1, arguably, they might say you need to have the same sexual harassment policy. So bear that in mind so you can be compliant.
Indeed. 745-2626 is the number to call, or you can join us via WhatsApp by dialing 928-2562. Either send us a voice note or the traditional WhatsApp text. Speaking of voice notes, we received one such now. Let's see if we can listen to it.
Austin and Ellio, good evening. I tend to agree with the point, despite being a retired lawyer myself. I agree with the point that I do not think that really it's necessary to have the chair and the deputy chair to be lawyers. I think you want chairs, a lawyer or 2 on the board, so that they can give some legal advice. But a lot of these issues sometimes, once you get a lawyer there, too many lawyers there, they can become overly legalistic and therefore fail to deal with some of the human sides of the issue.
Good point.
Second point. You see, this issue about sexual harassment, right, where it is said that if you make an advance of any kind, it should be a wanted advance, like a wanted sexual advance. Now, I'm not quite sure that a lot of young people who are still seeking love in these days are going to know very easily whether the other person will accept their sexual advance. Now, one way in which they can understand, they can get that message is if the lady there is behaving in an enticing way, in a more directly enticing way, then the young man might say, well, yes, I think she has acted in a way that is attracting me. Okay. Maybe there are certain situations which work out like that. But if the young man is not interested, he too might say, well, she was making a sexual advance on me, and I wasn't interested. Mm-hmm. And I think this issue needs to be addressed. I know that even in America, they haven't addressed it because the problem with the law is that it doesn't allow for an innocent advance to be made. And if it is rebuffed, then you leave it there. It just appears that even if you made some very slight advance, it could still be perceived to be sexual harassment. So how are people going to find love if you are going to have to telegraph that, please make a sexual advance on me. If you make one, it will be acceptable. I hope that the two of you in the studio can solve that long-standing problem.
Yeah, well,
thank you.
I
thank you very much.
Once again, I thank Mr. Simamba for his input. And I want to continue in that vein because I wanted to go there, even though I was reluctant now, considering that this is no longer green and it's a white paper. But I think if you look at the basics, and it's a discussion I think we really need to have in a very mature way, right? So no more joking here. I'm talking to myself.
Okay.
So in a very serious way, whether we're talking about human beings as at the top of the food chain, or whether we're talking about single-cell animals in a petri dish somewhere, it seems like every one of us are trying to connect. We're trying to get together, and that normally ends up in let's use the term sexual commerce. That's really what everybody is trying to engage in one way, shape, or another. And we get together, and as romantic as that might be or otherwise, it is a situation that that's why two persons are trying to connect. So let's be mature about it. Really what I gather from this legislation is that really what you're trying to say is I'm trying to give women the ability to determine and to say yes to who they want to say yes to and no to the other person. I could give a scenario where it's almost a case of saying, let's go, say you went up to a young lady and you said to her, hi, you look beautiful today, may I ask your number? Well, if she doesn't like you, one could argue that would squarely fall under this legislation and you're being now before a tribunal for sexual harassment. Yeah. Whereas if it was a gentleman that she liked, he had the right height, the right color eyes, or whatever it was, he could say the same thing. You look beautiful today, might I ask your number? He mightn't even have to append that you look beautiful. You could just simply ask your number, you see, because we have a pretty good idea, Austin, that when a gentleman even asks for your number, unless it's like, you're trying to sell flowers and he's asking for the business number, unless it's something like that, you probably have an idea where that's going.
Mutual attraction.
Right. Well, it might even be mutual. He or she might be attracted to you, or you might be attracted to her, but it doesn't, in my opinion, necessarily qualify as sexual harassment.
Mm-hmm.
Because what is wrong with someone trying, whether it's male, female, vice versa, whatever, what's wrong with trying to get someone's number? It's very simple. You would simply give some indication that you're not interested in giving the number. You could express the state, sorry, hi, no, sorry, I'm not giving you my number. Or you might just keep silent.
Yeah.
And then the person would get an indication, I don't think she's interested. Now, if you continue to persist, you see, I think the lay person out there can start to make determinations, say, why are you harassing the lady?
Right.
It's obvious that they don't want to get your number.
Sure.
But I'll bet you that the average person out there hearing a gentleman or a woman turn and ask a man or a woman for the number, say, can I have your number? I don't think most people are going to say, oh my God, he's harassing her. Because it's normal. It is normal human behavior. But if you read in here, that's one of the points.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the points that says that could clearly in black and white be sexual harassment. And so I think you have to be careful. And where I kind of see the world going right now, really quickly wrapping it up, it's almost like you're going to get to a point where I don't think men want to talk to women anymore.
Sure.
Sorry, you're going to fix that flat by yourself. Can't help you.
Indeed.
Got to go to a break.
745-2626, but we're going to pause, take a short commercial break, check in with the BBC News. But there'll be more Straight Talk still to come right here, only on Bobo FM.
Ready to elevate HR for your team? Cayman HR has you covered. Let us streamline your people processes so you can focus on growing your business. As gold partner for top HR software Bamboo HR, we now offer an integrated payroll solution, KPay. Designed specifically for the Cayman Islands, we can simplify your payroll and save you precious time. With KPay and Bamboo HR, managing your team has never been easier. Visit caymanhr.com to learn more today. Cayman HR. When it comes to people, we've got your back.
The BBC's From Our Own Correspondent.
In today's Russia, no one is allowed anywhere near the political stage if they pose a serious challenge to Vladimir Putin.
Stories and reflections from our reporters around the world.
There is a major sense of insecurity here.
More people are coming in from Sudan every day.
From Our Own Correspondent from the BBC.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
How can we understand the world better?
The BBC World Service is a window onto the wider world.
A vantage point from which to survey a new horizon.
News, reports, and analysis from around the world.
Stories we think matter.
Different people from different societies.
We get to the heart of global issues.
News, stories, and global perspectives from the BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
The BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
The BBC World Service makes programs with a uniquely global perspective.
Enlighten us. Where do we start?
The latest world news and current affairs.
The very best in global arts and culture.
What has been happening on the financial markets today.
Social issues, political stories.
Everything was there in a way that I never heard before.
The BBC World Service.
The home of the BBC World Service. This is Bobo FM.
Hello, I'm Govinda Gill with the BBC News. Donald Trump says he's made lots of progress on ending Russia's war in Ukraine after talks at the White House with Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Sir Keir said Mr. Trump warned that any peace deal must not reward the aggressor. Our North America editor Sarah Smith is in Washington.
The two men do appear to have a warm and friendly relationship, and Sir Keir said they had had a productive meeting. It was clear they did not reach similar agreement over Ukraine, with Mr. Trump insisting he thinks Vladimir Putin can be trusted to stick to any peace deal and ignoring Sir Keir's plea that he thinks the aggressor should not be rewarded. Tomorrow, Ukrainian President Zelensky will be in the Oval Office talking to Donald Trump and hoping he can win some kind of security guarantees for his country that would underpin any peace deal that may be negotiated.
Mexico has extradited 29 alleged drug cartel members to the United States. This is the biggest ever single-day extradition of Mexican nationals to the US. Our America's regional editor, Leonardo Rocha, reports.
Among those handed over by Mexico to the authorities in the US
are Rafael Caro Quintero, accused of torturing and murdering a U.S. official 40 years ago, and 2 former leaders of the Zetas drugs cartel, brothers Miguel Angel and Oscar Omar Trevino Morales, known as Z40 and Z42, founded Los Zetas in the 1990s. The criminal gang is known for its cruelty and ruthlessness and has been designated by the Trump administration as a terrorist group. The gang is behind a number of massacres in northern Mexico, including attacks against migrants who've been robbed and murdered while trying to reach the U.S. border.
The imprisoned founder of the group, the PKK, has called for his group to lay down its arms and end its 4-decade struggle against the Turkish state. In a statement read out by Kurdish politicians, Abdullah Öcalan said the PKK should dissolve itself as an organisation. The chairman of Turkey's governing party said the country would be free of its shackles, as he put it, if the PKK disbanded. Police in New Mexico investigating the death of the 2-time Oscar-winning actor Gene Hackman alongside his wife say they're treating the deaths as suspicious but don't suspect foul play. Emma Vardy has the details.
The actor's daughter initially told the entertainment news outlet TMZ that the family believed carbon monoxide poisoning may have been responsible. But testing by emergency crews found no evidence of toxic fumes or a gas leak. The sheriff said the front door to the house was found unlocked and open, and the couple were found in different rooms. They'd been dead for some time. They say there was no sign of foul play or forced entry, but they will have to wait for an autopsy to determine the cause of death.
You're listening to World News from the BBC. HIV charities in South Africa have called on the government to step in to fill the gap left by the sudden cancellation of US aid. The Trump administration cut its HIV programs overnight. South Africa, where almost 8 million people live with the condition, was the biggest beneficiary. The charity Save the Children says at least 70 people in Sudan have died from cholera and more than 2,000 have been infected over the past week as a direct result of the war. The outbreak in the White Nile state south of Khartoum comes after a drone strike on a power station disrupted access to clean water. Fighting has increased recently in the White Nile state. The US space company Blue Origin has announced plans for an upcoming all-female flight on its New Shepard rocket. Those on board will include Blue Origin owner Jeff Bezos' fiancée, Lauren Sanchez, the pop star Katy Perry and civil rights activist Amanda Wem. No date has been set for the launch. The Russian chess grandmaster Boris Spassky has died at the age of 88. He was the world chess champion for 3 years before losing the title in 1972. Russia's Chess Federation said Boris Spassky's death was a great loss to the country and the world. Oleg Boldarev looks back at his life.
Boris Spassky began playing chess at the early age of 5 in an orphanage during World War II. By the age of 14, he was playing internationally. His biggest game came in a contest that he ultimately lost, a psychologically exhausting series against the American Bobby Fischer in Reykjavik in 1972 during the Cold War. In 1976, he too emigrated to France, but eventually returned to Russia and spent his last years popularizing chess.
The views and opinions expressed on Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio do not necessarily reflect or represent the views of Stingray Media, its staff, or contributors. Callers to the program accept full responsibility for the views expressed. The show host and affiliates are not liable for any statements made or any harm claimed. All callers to the program indemnify Straight Talk from all claims. Offensive, defamatory, or unlawful content will not be tolerated. Be a part of the conversation by calling 745-2626. Now, here's Straight Talk with Austin and Ellio on Bobo FM.
Ladies and gentlemen, loving that beat that brings us in. Welcome back right here to Straight Talk with your two favorite hosts, Austin Harris and myself, Ellio Solomon. And of course, I understand we have a voice message. We're going to take that and continue our sexual harassment discussion.
Absolutely. Well, again, 745-2626. The phone lines are open if you want to call in and share a comment or a question on our topics on the board, which of course include the Sexual Harassment Act. You can do so. Also, if talking isn't your thing, you want to save those credits or otherwise, you can contact us via our WhatsApp number, 928-2562, either by sending us a voice or audio note or the traditional WhatsApp text. We do have one voice note to share, as Ellio said. Let's go to it now.
No, I appreciate what that lawyer was saying just now, but I remember this guy who had a show, and he was more or less someone who, he wasn't really matchmaking, but he was a good mentor to, to the young people as far as how to choose their mate and how to conduct themselves, with, if they're out on a date or, overall how to protect themselves from, from being victimized. And he said, he was saying that if you are the only one in the room with your clothes off, then you're doing something wrong. That might sound funny and laughable, but it's serious.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah.
If you're the only one in the room that has your clothes off, you're doing something wrong.
Correct me, I wasn't quite sure. Was it the only one in the room with the clothes on or clothes off?
I think she's saying off.
I think she said off. Yeah, now that makes sense. If you're the only naked person in a room full of clothed people,
but
clearly something's not quite right.
And you see, it's with all of this, right? I still remain confident that the majority of people out here in the radio land and in the world, I like to believe definitely in Cayman.
Yeah.
I'd like to believe that we're taking a slightly different approach. In fact, I chatted with at least 3 ladies today, just to check, do a kind of sanity check, right? Like I said, to me, honestly, it's kind of a normal behavior. And I think to her specific point, first of all, you got to understand when you talk about sexual harassment, you can say it's there for men too, but really, come on. Socially, it wouldn't even be acceptable for a man to make a complaint that he was sexually harassed by a woman. It would be like,
socially.
Oh my God, are you serious? But either way,
the same applies to domestic abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, socially, it's frowned on. It's against the machismo.
Don't come out and tell that your wife or your whatever beat you. No, you can't say that. So the bottom line of it is that, to her point about if you're the only one naked, I think that's the way I understood it. If you're the only one naked in the room, then something's wrong, and you have to look at that too. You got to understand who's going to complain when the lady comes and says, "Can I have your number?
Mm-hmm.
I really like you," or does whatever other indication gets in your space.
Mm-hmm.
You know how to get in your space, right? Just get in your space.
Yeah.
So you have to say something.
Space.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. You know what? You're gonna bring a sexual harassment suit? Come on. It's like, let's use a good common sense here. I think that we kind of know when it's like, I don't think that woman wants to hear from you. I don't think the man wants to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very much a common sense thing. We kind of all know it. Again, this is why I believe that having lay persons on a committee like this is just extremely important, because you should be there as much as possible being judged by your peers. Someone that has that reasonable man's thinking,
mm-hmm.
and not splitting hairs somewhere. I read something somewhere.
Yeah.
But either way, again, this is really something for the public to engage in. And like I said, I'm not sure how important it is right now, because I honestly thought that this was still green, but it's not. It's act, and I just can't believe that, as far as I'm concerned, I can't believe it's passed, to be quite honest with you.
Well, in your defense, and certainly in those who may, identify certain improvements right off the bat to this now law or act, whilst it may be an act, and in place right now on the books, I don't believe the regulations have come out. And oftentimes you have the law or act on the one hand, but then you have the regulations which outline the application of the law, how the law will be otherwise administered in the public domain, and some of the various moving parts. So perhaps there may be some wiggle room.
You're like a good news guy every day. I'm trying to find good news.
Well, I'm trying to find the good news. I'm just trying to show both sides of the coin.
Maybe there's a way to still have a positive impact. I get what you're saying.
A positive impact, or to the observations that you're making, that the absence of any layperson in the law itself is concerning.
Yeah.
Because you're suggesting that a layperson has no business participating in this.
That's what this tells me.
And I think, it certainly tells me the same as well. And I think you've made a very, very sound point for it. So all I'm saying is that, and this does happen often, you have the bill and the act, but then after the act is passed, there's, again, even further public discourse, and you find ways to fine-tune it, and that fine-tuning sometimes happens at the regulation, i.e. the application of the law itself, as long as it does not represent a direct contravention of what is outlined in the principal law or act, then the regulation certainly can introduce perhaps aspects that may not have been covered explicitly in the act or law itself.
I just want to see some of the good things protected. I don't want to see. I still think it's good when you can have someone proverbially running off of the street with a rose that they found and actually giving it to some lady. I don't really think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think opening doors for women isn't a bad thing. No. I don't think helping them to change a flat on their tire is a bad thing. Come on, you know. And I just think that, and I just throw those things out to say, we just need to make sure that all these things are done in a good and sensible way. And I just see some things in here that's quite challenging, but for another day maybe.
Yeah, yeah.
6:13 here in the studio. Not much time left. That gives us just about what? I don't know. 17 minutes.
60, just a little bit over 15 minutes before we go anywhere.
Before we end.
Before we end, yeah. And again, I'm just looking at page 12 and 13 of the actual act itself. When we talk about the all-encompassing aspect of this Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, it applies to facilities, and facilities includes any place in which a member of the public or a section of the public are permitted to enter. I think B1 says an accommodation is a hotel, boarding house, or similar establishment, banking, insurance, and financial services firms, education, entertainment or recreation, food and restaurants, transport and travel services, childcare services, healthcare and social services, sporting activities, religious activities. Institution is defined as a boarding home, a group home, a foster home, a residential care home, a children's home, a nursing home, a prison, a medical treatment facility or clinic. So again, this is not just restricted to where you hang your hat and go to work every day, but frankly, to your point, if you're on the grid, your footsteps in one of these areas that would otherwise run contrary
I could
to
be wrong.
legislation.
I could be wrong, but I think they changed one of the policies that when women showing up now to get their driver's license, so when they're going to get the driving test or whatever,
yes,
like you have to dress a certain way. I wonder why. I wonder why.
Yes.
But I think...
Well, certainly to your point, the dress code applies to Parliament. It's a fantastic example. You cannot get into Parliament in shorts.
Right. And so to the lady who sent the voice message, again, is something similar. If you're the only one in the room naked, then chances are you're in the wrong room.
Well, chances are you are. It looks like we received another audio note, but it's still the wheel is still spinning to suggest perhaps that the audio file is still
buffering on its way,
buffering or downloading. So until that happens, another interesting news item that I think applies largely to the decision that voters will be making at the polls is a notice that appeared in both media houses, but we'll read the Compass today, where it talks about Winspear bows out with a warning of unsustainable finances. Of course, they're referring to the Auditor General, Mrs. Sue Winspear, who will be not renewing her contract, but in fact will be leaving the island, I think, this weekend.
And the reason for the resignation is what?
I think it's health concerns. I believe I heard the murmurings of it, but I don't believe it was also highlighted in the official release. I don't know, but I believe I heard something about health concerns. And if that's the case, I mean, I served and worked with Sue Winspear as a member of the Public Accounts Committee. I have a lot of respect for her and the work that she did, and I want to thank her for the services to the Cayman Islands. I believe they were genuine, her and her office. And if it is health-related, then certainly you go with my prayers for a speedy recovery. But Auditor General from the news says Auditor General Sue Winspear, as she prepares to bid farewell to the Cayman Islands this weekend, after more than 8 years scrutinizing but also trying to help with public financings, she has published one of her most damning reports to date, stressing the long-term unsustainability of government spending and concerns about its ability to meet future financial commitments. Winspear points out that while the Cayman Islands government is running a surplus, and has done so for 4 out of the last 6 years between 2018 and 2023, those surpluses are declining. Public spending grew by over 51%, while revenues increased by just 25%. Clearly, you can see the disparity. Over the same period, the government increased spending on health care by a whopping 74%. She says, and she's quoted, "I'm disappointed that there continues to be poor budgeting for tertiary health care, despite highlighting this in 2020. Significant overspending continues, requiring annual supplementary budgets. Public debt currently stands at around $453 million, which is comparatively low compared to debt held by other countries in this region, but it is likely to increase over the next 2 years as a result of the UPM's commitment to a host of grandiose projects, not least of which one that has been hotly debated is the new high school in Cayman-Brac, which I think somebody said you could fly students over from Grand Cayman to attend school on Cayman-Brac and fill every classroom and still not cost as much as it's costing to build the facility.
Well, you know, and I hear you on that. And some things are glaringly obvious and some things are a little bit more sneaky, right? But let me just give you and the public one. You might be aware of it, but I'll highlight it. And this is where I said, whether it's this piece of legislation or otherwise, there's some common sense things that I see missing. Like I'm saying, it's common sense to me that you should have laypersons on this. Let me tell you a little story. I'm on a committee, you know, and let's say that committee right now in the government gets, let's make it a nice, quick, easy figure, $1,000 per member. You know, you meet once a month, $1,000 a member. And then I get a letter and it says, yeah, the next member get, so I said, for clarification, this is $1,000 if they attend the meeting, right? Mm-hmm. See, my common sense tripped in. I don't know why that keeps tripping in there.
I hear Elon. Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't, Elon. Yeah, I know I could add an N to my name. Yeah. Anyway, this is my common sense tripping in. You mean $1,000 for every meeting they attend? No. Because I said, no, this letter must be an error. It has to be that you're saying $1,000 for every meeting they attend. No. So even if they don't attend, 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, they still get the $1,000. Yeah. I called that same lady that you were talking about now. Is this right? This can't possibly be right. Yeah. That's the policy. And then they talk about the UK and like I'm supposed to care what the UK is doing. And she says, well, you know, I agree. Maybe we can lobby the government to change it. But this is what I'm saying. It's like you talk about rewarding bad behavior. I mean, like, really, are you going to get any member that really wants to, you know, show up? Mm-hmm. You get paid either way. Like, what world are we living in?
Right.
This is taxpayers' money.
Sure it is.
Right?
Sure it is.
I mean, the basics of just simply being able to say, I'm sorry, you're a board member, but you didn't show up, so, you know, you don't get paid. Just seems like good business to me, but not in government, apparently.
But if I could hear from you, you called, obviously, the same Auditor General, and is it your statement that she didn't respond shocked or disappointed or saying, no, that is wrong or whatever? She just said, that's the policy of the day, and
well,
and
you know, I
not be concerned by it.
I don't want to beat her up. I don't want to beat her up, you know, because that's what would be occurred. It's just going on that woman. But the thing of it is that I think I would put it nicely to say I think that she understood my concern. Mm-hmm. She agreed with that concern.
Okay.
And that she was simply offering that maybe the various boards, et cetera, needs to come together and lobby the government to change it.
Right.
Now, what I would honestly have loved to heard her say is, Ellio, I completely agree with you. And in fact, I'll be putting that in my report.
Okay.
And maybe she did do that. Maybe she did put it in some report. But I'm just simply saying, this is not rocket science.
No.
You show up to work, you get paid. You don't show up to work, you don't get paid. And to have government employees and the list going on that's allowing this nonsense to continue is just amazing to me. Yes. Right?
Well, certainly to your point, and hence why I referenced you to Elon is, we like it or lump it, his whole Department of Doge is looking at wasteful spending, government spending, that we spend money on things that, to your point, people don't even show up to meetings. It happens in the U.S., and apparently it continues to happen here in the Cayman Islands. But one of the reasons why I shared the story of the most damning report from Mrs. Winspear and the whole Auditor General's office was to offer a bit of a carrot, if you will, or a flower, a rose to the progressives, given we closed out yesterday's show by reading a viewpoint from, one of the media houses, which obviously has a slant and arguably maybe, in more support of one grouping of the elections candidates than others. And again, that's a matter of opinion. But on the issue of overspending, this has been, and again, yesterday that viewpoint was harsh on the PPM. I want to, again, give them props where it's deserved. Whilst persons may argue today in the public realm how effective the opposition under the last administration, which again wraps up on Monday when the nomination begins. Well, on Friday, which is March the 1st, is when the House is dissolved. Mm-hmm. Whether you agree or disagree that the opposition has been effective or not, one of the things that the opposition has been banging the drum on the current UPM administration and prior to that, the PACT administration, but specifically under the UPM and their 2024 to 2025 budget, was on the decision to spend and overspending. If we look to an article that also appeared in the Compass in 2023, it reads, Opposition Leader Roy McTaggart has called for a shift in direction of the United People's Movement's government's expenditure plan, saying that its spend rather than save choices in the 2024-2025 budget will have serious economic implications for the Cayman Islands. McTaggart in Parliament on Monday, this is going back to December 2023, at the start of the budget debate, said that the UPM's $2 billion budget, which includes $150 million in new borrowing, will bring additional strain to an already burdened community battling with inflation and the cost of living challenges. Despite what the figures may indicate going up or going down even by small margins, you ask any of the average layperson or consumer, they'll tell you the cost of living is still paralyzingly high. Mr. McTaggart stated at the time, our commercial banks will be salivating at this opportunity to bid on providing new financing to the government. However, Caymanians will be paying for these excesses of those of the government benches for decades. And all it was simply was, and again, this was the consistent position of the opposition, right or wrong, but they were always urging restraint, financial prudence as it relates to spending. And again, we see this played out in both the PACT and UPM administrations in the absence of cohesion, number one, in the absence of an accepted leadership structure. You had 19, well, in this case, maybe 12 or 13 who make up the government at one stage, though that number dwindled over time rather rapidly, almost from one parliamentary meeting to the next. But you saw every member of the government having a wish list and every member of the government having that wish list satisfied at some point or the other. And it's just simply unheard of. I mean, think of your term in office. I think of the numerous ideas that you brought to the table, but only a small percentage of them were actually enacted. That is to go to say that, we can all have wishes, but we can't all have everything all at once. The opposition have been waving the warning flag about overspending for a number of years, and the Auditor General has simply confirmed it in her final salvo outgoing message to the Cayman Islands.
Well, I would argue that I came up with ideas that gave people an opportunity to make money without taking out of government coffers and also giving some opportunity to bring some money into the country. But, I think it is so important that we look at whatever system and stuff it is that we have. One of my things that I continue to say is a fundamental decision that every elected person will have to make is whether I want to stay in office or whether I want to do the right thing. And the two rivers seldom converge. And again, I'm going to tell you, you see all this anti-sexual legislation like this? I'm going to make the argument. I'm happy to debate it with anyone. A lot of this happens is because you're going to have politicians at the moment that comes up, but they can't even seem to be against something like this because it puts the wrong image on them. It's controversial and whatever else term that comes along. And it's nothing different in terms of spending government money. I've always said it's easy to spend it, but not so easy to make it, right? But if you get into government and you get up and you try to be frugal and say, listen, we're not going to spend the money here, we're not going to spend the money there, we're going to cut this, then chances are you lose your seat.
Right.
And this is, again, you want to do the right thing or do you want to keep your seat? And there's certain systems that you have to understand you have in place. I remember being first in the media when I had kpolitics.com many years ago. And you recognize, again, you can use as a perfect example, you look and you say as the media, well, I'm dependent largely on advertisement. But you know what about the advertisers? The advertisers don't necessarily want to advertise when you're peeing the government off. Because they say, boy, you know, I need my permit, and I don't know if I want my company on our website.
Yes.
Okay, so what do you get?
That carries over to today.
Again, if I'm going to run the money-making business, then I sit and I say, okay, well, that's not. I know the government's wrong, but I can't beat them. I don't want to beat the government because, hey, you know, I might lose some revenues. All of these are the sort of things that you have to grapple with. And it comes down to, do I want to stay in business or do the right thing? Do I want to stay in office or do I want to do the right thing? And there's a money mechanism to all of this, and it's something just for us to keep in the back of our minds when we hear that the politician is going to spend X amount of millions to do X, Y, and Z. But I can tell you, we don't have a DOJ office here, and I remember while I was in office, I took a trip to Panama, and there was a Department of Innovations. And I brought that back here, and I said, I think we need something like a Department of Innovations, which I guess would have been like a DOJ, because amongst other things, it would have been a matter of looking at the departments for processes, technology. Is there ways to improve things to help make it more efficient and lower the cost? And in addition, you have to say, listen, can I cut this money here? I don't necessarily need to have this spending here. But of course, again, it never happened because that's not going to be cutting a ribbon. You're not necessarily going to win any votes on that. But it definitely, in my opinion, would have been something good for the government. Just like I mentioned yesterday, I also said, listen, guys, we need to change the legislation. What about if you have to have a mass burial? But until now, what's that been, 15 years?
A while.
You still don't hear anything about that. Time to wrap it up.
That's all the time we have for you today, K-Man. Thank you to all of those who tuned in. Thank you for those who made contributions to the program. We wrap up our show again for another week tomorrow. We encourage you to tune in to more Straight Talk Monday through Friday, starting at 4:30 to 6:30, brought to you exclusively by Bobo FM.
The BBC on Bobo. This is the BBC World Service.